Welcome all. We're going to talk briefly about social infection, the social infectious theory, and also the epidemiological triad. So you can see that picture there is actually an example of the epidemiological triad. We're going to talk about how uh, the host, the agent, the environment, and the vector all work together to either create or prevent disease. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Today in the United States, 40 people will die from AIDS or HIV, 50 people will be murdered, 89 will commit suicide, 112 will die from motor vehicle accidents, about half of those will involve alcohol, 1,200 will die from tobacco, and 1,900 people in the United States every day will die from poor diet. So we're going to talk about the social ecologic model. We're going to talk briefly about the obesity epidemic and this idea of social infectious disease. And we're going to talk about how that triad kind of works into that. So again, a review of the social ecologic model. Again, we're going to start here in the middle, that center circle. And this is the factors that can either create or prevent disease, or the factors that influence disease. So, of course, your age, your gender, your genetics, constitutional factors are, of course, very important. Your lifestyle factors: do you smoke? Do you drink? Do you eat healthy? Do you exercise? And then, kind of on the even larger than that, is the social and community networks. You know, what kind of social support system is available? Do you even know what types of foods that you're supposed to be eating? What type of an educational system is available in your local community? You know, do you even have access to healthy food? Or is your neighborhood just filled with fast food restaurants? The so-called food deserts listed by the United States Department of Agriculture include certain parts of Philadelphia. There's a place called Norristown, which is in Montgomery County near my house. Chester is another area. The good news is that they're starting to recognize this, and they're starting to put supermarkets in those types of places. So we know all these things are extremely important. And of course, government policy is very important, and corporate policies in a lot of ways can influence these things. So the idea of social infectious theory or social infection theory, if everybody in your family smokes, you're probably going to pick up smoking. If everybody in your family likes to drink a lot of alcohol, that will probably influence the likelihood that you will also pick up that habit, which of course is going to affect your health in the long term. Non-communicable diseases like obesity, cardiovascular disease, cancer can become infectious in that if many of the people in your immediate environment are obese or have another disease, then that automatically elevates your risk of that disease because you're going to be exposed to the same risk factors that will elevate that risk for disease. And those risk factors include, being exposed to a lot of fast food or being exposed to a lot of advertising from the tobacco or alcohol industry, whatever it might be. So, again, if your three best friends are overweight, that's probably going to increase your likelihood of being overweight. And of course, we've known this through migratory studies. Women from Japan who have a relatively low risk of breast cancer, as soon as they move to the United States, their risk of breast cancer increases. And then the subsequent generations, they're of Japanese women, even though they're still genetically Japanese women, they're not necessarily mixing. Trying to be politically correct. They're not, they're not intermingling or intermarrying with other races. They're still, pure Japanese, as it were. But they still have an increased risk of breast cancer just moving to the United States. And of course, predatory advertising. They manipulate people into using tobacco, alcohol, soda, fast food. So we can say that it's the parents' fault for the obesity epidemic. But what I like to say is that blaming the parents for the obesity epidemic is like blaming a field goal kicker for losing a 1-point game because that kicker missed a last-second 50-yard field goal. A very difficult shot. So in both scenarios, it's the team effort that is going to contribute to our success or failure in this, in whether we're talking about obesity or cardiovascular disease or cancer or whatever it might be. So again, here's a picture of the triad, the epidemiological triad. Disease can spread to a host, and of course we're talking about human health. If we were veterinarians, we could also use this, but we're talking about humans. So the host is a human. Through the disease spreads through a combination of the environment, the agent, and the vector. The agent is the thing that actually causes the disease, whether it is a virus, a parasite, a cigarette would be, if you're talking about lung disease, you could say the agent is the cigarette itself. The environment, so the agent is prevalent within a certain environment. So if we're talking about malaria, for example, the agent is a parasite. The environment usually is like a swampy type of environment, and then the vector, the delivery system, is a mosquito. So a mosquito, usually when you talk about a vector, you're talking about an insect or an animal, but we're going to talk about some other examples of vectors. So here is a picture of the epidemiological triad for malaria. All right, so you have a swampy environment. We have a human host who is native to this area, and there is the vector, the mosquito, and the vector is actually carrying the agent, which is the parasite, the malaria, the actual malaria parasite. So you can see that little tick thing is the actual malaria. The vector, I would have drawn this except for I'm not an artist. The vector, of course, is the mosquito. The environment is just a swampy environment, and then the human host. And we know, of course, about 1 million people a year die from malaria. A lot of those are children, unfortunately. So this is a preventable disease. Usually vector control is a big part of it. There is not an effective vaccine, unfortunately, quite yet, but vector control is primarily what they try to use. So let's talk about obesity, the epidemiological triad for obesity. Again, we're talking about humans, so we have a human host. There is always, of course, genetic susceptibilities when you're talking about any disease, but obesity seems to be linked at least partially to genetics. The general population, unfortunately, is undereducated about nutrition. They even if they are exposed to healthy, to appropriate education, it's oftentimes not backed up. Whether you're talking about the school cafeterias or, walking through the supermarket or wherever it might be, because children are exposed, especially to a lot of really unhealthy advertisements. Because our environment, if you go to the right corner there, cultural norms. Everybody eats. I shouldn't say everybody, but the consumption of unhealthy food is culturally acceptable. Let's put it that way. We're exposed to massive amounts of propaganda through advertising. There's, of course, political influence. The USDA has been pretty heavily criticized. I mean, to be fair to them, they're still pushing that most of our diet should be plant-based. But if you look at the programs that are in the school cafeterias, especially, those school cafeterias essentially become vectors or delivery systems of the agents that cause obesity. The agent, of course, are any foods that are high in fats, salt, and sugar. So basically, junk food, obviously. So the vector is any delivery system that would deliver those agents, whether you're talking about a hot dog cart outside of a whatever library, whatever they are. I mean, you see them all over the place. The ice cream store, or the ice cream truck. So all these, at least in my mind anyway, all these things become vectors, delivery systems, potential delivery systems that are contributing to this problem, this obesity problem. Okay, so your extra credit assignment. What I want you to do is write up a paragraph. This should be, I would say, total of 400 to 500 words, and just to pick any communicable or non-communicable disease. So you can, any infectious or non-communicable disease that you like, other than obviously obesity and malaria, because I just did those. And just explain the epidemiological triad, the interaction between the human host. If you want to do veterinary medicine, if that's your thing, you're welcome to do that. But the host, and then the thing that actually causes the disease, whether it's a virus or a parasite, the environment, and then of course the vector, the delivery system. And keeping in mind, a vector could be an insect. Usually, they consider it to be an insect or another animal, like rabies. Rabies would be the rabid animal then becomes the vector, because the rabid animal then bites somebody else, and then that's how the rabies spread. So the vector could be a lot of things. A vector could be a doorknob. If somebody sneezes into their hands and then touches that doorknob, and then now that virus is on that doorknob, and then that becomes the delivery system. Okay, so just kind of play with this a little bit, and again, pick any disease that you like. try and come up with it. I'm sure if you Google epidemiological triad for whatever condition, you'll find something. So if you do that, just be sure to use references. All right, and then the second paragraph I want is you explain how you can use the social ecologic model to help control this problem, whatever this problem is. What sort of community efforts could be placed to help reduce this problem? What sort of government policies could be done? What sort of educational programs could they use to help deal with this problem? Okay, and that's it. I hope this was helpful. Take care.